If you take a 10-cent cube of a common household cleaning sponge, thread it onto a bare hook, and drag it across the bottom of a lake, it generates a microscopic acoustic frequency. To the human ear, it is completely silent. But to the highly evolved lateral line system of a predatory walleye, the physical displacement of water rushing through that specific cellular matrix perfectly mimics the hydrodynamic signature of a dying baitfish. Last week, on a heavily pressured lake in central Minnesota, I abandoned traditional lures entirely. I used nothing but small white cubes cut from a cheap melamine cleaning pad. In 3.5 hours, that 10-cent piece of cleaning equipment pulled 14 keeper-sized walleyes out of dark, turbid water where expensive, technologically advanced rattle baits were being completely ignored. We are not talking about visual deception, and we are not talking about scent. We are talking about weaponizing raw fluid dynamics to trigger a mandatory acoustic strike. The test took place in late October on Mille Lacs Lake, Minnesota. For walleye anglers, this is a notoriously challenging environment. A heavy autumn cold front had pushed through the region, dropping the surface water temperature to a frigid 48 degrees. The wind was blowing steadily from the northwest at 15 miles per hour, creating a heavy, turbulent chop on the surface. Because of the wave action and the seasonal turnover, the water clarity was exceptionally poor. Visibility was reduced to less than 14 inches. In these specific conditions, cold water, heavy chop, and near-zero visibility, walleyes retreat to deeper rock reefs and gravel transitions, usually suspending between 18 and 24 feet down. Down there, it is pitch black. They cannot hunt using their eyes. They must rely entirely on their mechanoreceptors to locate prey. To establish a proper, undeniable scientific baseline for this test, I started my morning using the industry standard for dark water walleye fishing. I tied on a premium, heavy rattle lipless crankbait and a specialized tungsten jig equipped with glass sound chambers. These lures cost between $12 and $18 each. The entire premise of these expensive modern baits is that when fish cannot see, you must make as much noise as possible to get their attention. The internal metal BBs and glass beads clacked together loudly, supposedly calling fish in from a distance. I positioned my boat over a prominent gravel reef sitting in 20 feet of water. I spent a full hour and 15 minutes aggressively ripping those expensive rattle baits through the strike zone. I covered every angle of the reef. I changed my retrieve speed. I paused. I let it hit the bottom. In 75 minutes of intense, focused effort, I received exactly one strike. It was a short, tentative bump that failed to hook up. The fish were clearly down there. My sonar screen showed several large arches holding tight to the rocks. But they were actively refusing the loud, mechanical presentation of the commercial lures. I reeled up, cut the $15 rattle bait off my line, and pulled out a small, generic white cleaning pad. This is commonly sold in grocery stores as a magic eraser. It is a basic melamine foam sponge designed to scrub scuff marks off walls and floors. A bulk pack costs less than $1, making the amount I was about to use worth approximately 10 cents. I took a pocket knife and carefully cut a 1-inch square cube from the sponge. I did not add any scent. I did not add any live bait. I simply threaded that dry white foam cube onto a bare 1-4-ounce lead jig head, pushing the hook directly through the center of the sponge so it sat flush against the lead. When I dropped it into the water alongside the boat, the sponge immediately absorbed water, achieving a perfect state of neutral buoyancy behind the heavy lead head. It looked like absolutely nothing, just a dull white square of foam on a piece of metal. I dropped the rig straight down 20 feet to the base of the gravel reef. Because the melamine sponge has no erratic action of its own, I fished it with a painfully slow, dragging retrieve. I would slowly lift the rod tip, dragging the heavy lead across the rocks, and then let it sit motionless for 5 seconds. At exactly 14 minutes into the new presentation, during a dead pause, the rod tip did not tap. It simply loaded up with a massive, heavy weight. I set the hook and felt the distinct, deep head shakes of a large walleye. I fought the fish up from 20 feet and netted a beautiful, thick 23-inch walleye. I looked inside its mouth. The fish had completely inhaled the bare cleaning sponge. It hadn't nipped at the tail. It had aggressively engulfed the entire rig. I checked the foam, which was still perfectly intact, and dropped it right back down to the exact same depth. 8 minutes later, the line ticked slightly to the right. I swept the rod upward and hooked a 19-inch walleye. 12 minutes after that, a 21-inch fish hit the sponge on the drop before it even reached the bottom. Over the next 2 hours, the pattern became a clinical execution of physics. Moving along the edges of the gravel reef, dragging a 10-cent piece of household cleaning equipment, I systematically pulled 14 keeper-sized walleyes out of a school that had completely ignored the loudest, most expensive lures in my tackle box. To understand why a predatory fish will aggressively attack a piece of kitchen foam in total darkness, you have to ignore the tackle shop catalogs and dive deeply into the fluid dynamics of water and the microscopic anatomy of the walleye's lateral line system. Walleyes and all freshwater predators possess a lateral line, a highly complex sensory organ running down the sides of their bodies. This organ is filled with neuromasts, which are microscopic, gel-filled cupullae containing sensory hairs. These hairs are incredibly sensitive to pressure gradients, water displacement, and low-frequency acoustic vibrations. In dark, turbid water, a walleye uses this system to feel the exact size, speed, and distress level of a baitfish from yards away. The modern tackle industry assumes that to trigger this system, louder is always better. They pack plastic lures with heavy steel, lead, and glass beads to create a loud, clacking racket. But in heavily fished waters, or when fish are in a neutral feeding state, a loud mechanical rattle does not sound like food. It sounds like a machine. It is unnatural. It creates an acoustic footprint that is far too aggressive, often causing pressured fish to scatter rather than strike. A melamine cleaning sponge operates on a completely different plane of physics. Unlike a normal dish sponge, which is made of soft cellulose, melamine foam is actually a formaldehyde melamine sodium bisulfite copolymer. If you look at it under a microscope, it is not a soft sponge at all. It is a highly complex, three-dimensional web of extremely hard, abrasive, glass-like resin strands. It is an open-cell matrix. When you drag that specific open-cell resin matrix through the water, it does not just push water out of the way like a smooth piece of plastic. The water is forced to rush through millions of microscopic, rigid pores. As the water is sheared and accelerated through this abrasive matrix, it creates thousands of microscopic vortices and micro-cavitations. This creates micro-turbulence. This fluid dynamic phenomenon generates a continuous, high-pitch, extremely low-amplitude acoustic frequency. It is a subtle, hydrodynamic hum. To a walleye's lateral line, this micro-acoustic vibration perfectly replicates the exact physical frequency of water rushing over the fluttering fins and struggling gills of a dying baitfish. It is not a loud, clunky, mechanical rattle. It is the natural, organic sound of life struggling in the water column. The walleye does not need to see the sponge. It does not need to smell it. Its mechanoreceptors detect that microturbulence, classify it as vulnerable prey, and trigger a mandatory targeted strike in the pitch black. This brutal reality exposes a $120 million blind spot in the modern walleye and bass fishing industry. Every year, the major lure manufacturers spend fortunes trying to convince you that fish require complex mechanical noise to be caught in dark water. They engineer intricate resonance chambers, market specialized tungsten rattles, and sell you $15 plastic swim baits under the promise that technology is the only way to get a fish's attention. They sell you volume because volume is easy to manufacture and easy to market. But they completely ignore the subtle, microscopic fluid dynamics that fish have evolved for millions of years to track. Why? Because there is absolutely no profit margin in microacoustics if the perfect delivery system already exists in the cleaning aisle of a grocery store. A tackle company cannot patent the open cell structure of melamine foam. They cannot put a professional angler's face on a box of magic erasers, mark the price up 500%, and sell it to you as a revolutionary new acoustic technology. The industry needs you to believe that fish are impressed by loud, expensive plastic toys. They desperately hope you never figure out that the delicate, natural frequencies of struggling prey can be perfectly replicated by pulling 10 cents of bare, unscented cleaning foam across the rocks. The 14 walleyes I pulled from Mille Lacs Lake did not care about the brand of my lure. They did not care about my presentation, and they certainly did not care about glass rattles. They cared about the microscopic displacement of water. They responded to a pure, unadulterated physical frequency that told them a meal was waiting in the dark. The next time you are faced with cold, muddy, or heavily pressured water, and your expensive rattle baits are failing to produce a single strike, stop trying to make more noise. Stop trying to wake the fish up with mechanical clacking. Take a 10-cent cube of melamine foam, thread it onto a bare jig head, and drag it slowly through the strike zone. Let the microscopic fluid dynamics of the water do exactly what nature designed them to do. If you are interested in the raw physics of water and the actual sensory biology of fish, consider subscribing to the channel. Have you ever noticed fish reacting to subtle vibrations? Or have you ever had a day where loud, traditional lures completely failed you while a quiet, simple presentation dominated? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one of them.